If you want to quilt a project with your machine, there are basically two ways to go about it. One is called straight quilting and the other is free motion quilting. In this video, I'm going to talk about a few ways to mark your fabric so that you can do beautiful straight stitching. Now, because a quilted project has 3 layers, it has the backing, the batting, and the topper, you want to use a walking foot. And a walking foot, depending on your brand, will look a little bit different. But basically, it has feet, just like your feed dogs, that are up top with your presser foot so that your material is being moved from the top and the bottom and not just the bottom. That will prevent buckling and puckering. So that is really, really important if you're going to be doing quilting by machine. Now you need to decide how you want to quilt. You'll notice I've already done some just straight lines. I've done X's through some of these squares. Now I'm going to show you a few ways that I can mark what I want to do in these rectangle sections of this quilt block. The easiest, most traditional way is to just take a pencil or a heat erasable pen. You want to make sure you use one that is made for fabric. There are the Flexion pens, but apparently if they get cold, the pen color might come back. So I do not use those when marking the front of a quilt. These are 2-inch wide rectangles, so I just want to do straight lines. So for this one, I'm just going to take a pencil and I'm going to very lightly draw a line so that I have a guide and I will just sew directly on that. Now I could do the same thing with the heat erasable pen, and I'm just setting up my 1-inch mark right on that seam so that this line is going to be right down the center. So that is much easier to see. This is a heat erasable pen from Madame Sew that is designed for fabric. So once I sew on there and we press it, it's going to go away, never to return. So those are your first 2 ways. Draw on your fabric in some way. Right now I have my 1/4-inch walking foot on, and honestly, I use this probably 90% of the time when I am sewing or quilting. And unless I'm doing stitch in the ditch, where I'm literally going in that ditch, which I'll show you in a moment, I usually just use this foot. It is a walking foot, so it will move the top and bottom together. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how we're going to sew straight down these lines that we drew with the pen and with the pencil. Now, because I don't want a bird's nest on the back, I'm going to pull my bobbin thread up, which means I'm going to put my foot down, hold that top thread, needle down, needle up, give it a little yank, grab my tweezers and pull that thread, use that to get those threads under the foot. Now I am holding both threads and I am going to knot, or if your machine doesn't automatically knot, you can just go forward and back a few stitches, holding these threads so that it can't get sucked down and turn into one of those crazy little bird's nest knots. And now I'm simply going to sew straight down that line. Now I forgot to change my stitch length. I've been doing some piecing, so I did a really short stitch length, which to me, it's too short for quilting. It's at a 1.8, so I'm going to change that to actually a 3.8, which is what I used here. It just gives a bigger stitch and it holds everything together just fine and it doesn't take as long. So now I'm just going to do the same thing on that pencil line. Okay, then I usually do just trim these threads as I go. I don't want them to get caught up in any other quilting by mistake. Now this is a fun, cheaty way, kind of. You can use painter's tape or masking tape, any kind of tape that is not going to leave a bunch of residue on your fabric. This is 1 inch wide. This is 2 inches wide. So if you wanted to do a bunch of quilting that was all 2 inches wide, you could take this, put it down, sew, move it, move it, move it. Because we have 2-inch squares, I want a line at 1 inch. I'm just going to take this 1-inch tape, take a piece off. I'm going to line it up with that seam. And now if I use that as a guideline, I am good to go. Then after I sew that, I can just lift this up and move it to the next rectangle. You can move these probably 8 to 10 times before they're really hard to stay down. And then just use a new piece of tape or just do more pressure. Now I can just lift that tape and move it to the next rectangle and do that one as well. So there's nothing to iron off. There's no pencil mark that's going to need to be washed off eventually. You're just using the painter's tape as your guide. Okay, so we've done pen, pencil, and tape. Now let's try the seam guide that came with my sewing machine. Now, a seam guide is usually a piece of metal that comes with your sewing machine or that you can get for your sewing machine. It's slightly pointy on that end so that you can put it into your foot. And then this part is curved and it rests on the fabric and it moves like this so that you can use it as a guide on top of your fabric, just like you would use guide marks if you were stitching close to an edge and you could see your needle plate. Check your instruction manual to see if you have this and how it works on your machine. But for mine, there's a little hole on the side of the foot and it just slides right in there. And then I can just push it to be a variety of distances from the needle. And then you can see it's coming out over on this side. So it just goes right through. So now we're going to use this seam guide to stitch the 1 inch down the center of this block. So that means we need to set it 1 inch from where the needle is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to put the 1 inch mark right under the needle. Now I'm going to use my hand wheel and I'm going to move my needle down just a teeny bit. We're not going to try and sew through a ruler because that's not going to end well for anyone. But I just want to make sure it's hitting that 1 inch mark. I'm going to push the seam guide so that it is right on the side of that ruler. So that means when the seam guide is to the outside of this seam, we will be stitching 1 inch from that seam line. So now I'm just going to sew straight and I'm going to run that guide just to the side of that seam. It's another way of getting that straight line done 1 inch from a seam, and like using the tape, there is no mark that we're going to need to get rid of later. And when you're sewing with a seam guide, you want your eyes over here on the guide, making sure it's staying where you want it to be and not on your needle. Because if you look at your needle, you might start pivoting your fabric and then your line might not go straight. Now I have the stitch in the ditch foot on, and you'll see this black part has this little guide that we are going to use to follow the seam. So we're going to have this black part follow right where that seam is so that our stitching will basically be right in there and won't be very visible, if visible at all. That is the goal, for it not to be visible. Because we're starting in the middle of the project, we're going to pull up our bobbin thread. This is a little bit harder to do with a stitch in the ditch. It's a little harder to get it under there because of that guide. So I usually lift my foot again to get that to come and pull back. And then just make sure the guide is still where you want it to be when you put the foot back down. And again, you don't want to look at the needle, you want to look at the front of the guide. And this is one where I sew pretty slowly just to make sure it is staying where I want it to be and it doesn't end up wiggling. Now I want to go all the way around this diamond, but you can see I pivoted too soon because this is not right on that edge. So I'm going to go back. It's hard to see where my needle is at this point. So I'm going to do one more stitch. All right, there we go. As you can see, there's a lot of pivoting of fabric. And this is just a table runner. Normally, if I was doing a quilt, I would have my quilting gloves on. The main thing is to make sure the area around where you are going to be sewing is staying flat. And then the rest you can just fold and manipulate so that it doesn't drag. So those were a few ways to just do straight line stitching on a quilt or any kind of quilted project so that you can finish it on your machine at home. Using the stitch in the ditch, you have basically hidden stitches that you can barely see. Or like we did on this other one, we made the stitching part of the design because it's going to add some texture to it. And then I'm just going to hit that with an iron to make that pen go away. Here, there's a little bit of pencil. You can barely see it. And up here, we use the tape and the guide. So there's nothing to worry about on any of these rectangles. So leave me a comment and let me know where you are with machine quilting. Is this something that you have done before, you're just learning about, you're looking into, you're looking for tips? I would love to know what kind of projects you do and what your favorite things to do are.